That muddy little ditch of yours is becoming a paved community walkway, Mr. Evans. The vote was unanimous. We start paving on Monday. The words delivered with the smug finality of a queen bee pronouncing a drone's expulsion hung in the crisp autumn air between us. I sat astride my 16-hand quarter horse, Valor, his powerful body a warm, living fortress beneath me, and looked down at the source of the proclamation. Her name was Karen Miller, and she was the president, judge, and jury of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association. She stood with her feet planted wide on the gravel shoulder of the road. A plus-size woman poured into a lurid pink tracksuit. Her arms crossed so tightly over her chest it looked like she was trying to physically restrain her own sense of self-importance. In one hand, she clutched a sheaf of papers, the official declaration of war. My eyes drifted from her pinched, triumphant face to the muddy little ditch in question. It was the Bridlewood Heritage Path, a trail that had existed in some form for over 200 years, first as a Native American trade route, then as a post road for the early republic, and now as a state-designated historical trail under a conservation easement that I personally managed. It was the reason I'd bought this 50-acre parcel of land 10 years ago upon my retirement from the Army Corps of Engineers. Valor shifted his weight, his shod hoof clinking softly against a stone embedded in the trail. The sound a quiet protest against the absurdity of the moment. I kept my voice even, the way you do when you're de-escalating a situation that has the potential to get very stupid, very fast. Karen, I said, my voice calm but carrying the weight of command I'd honed over 30 years of service. We've been over this. This trail is not HOA property. It is part of my deeded land, and it's protected by the state. You cannot pave it. She gave a dismissive little snort, a sound that managed to be both airy and condescending. Oh, we're past all that legal mumbo-jumbo, Mr. Evans. Our attorney has reviewed the situation. He calls it an implied easement. The community has been using it for years, and now the community has voted to improve it. It's for the good of everyone. It will increase property values. You should be thanking us. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement was breathtaking. It was a tactical weapon designed to overwhelm reason with sheer audacity. And I could see the battle plan in her eyes. She expected me to bluster, to get angry, to yell. She was prepared for that. She fed on that kind of conflict. I refused to give her the satisfaction. There is no implied easement, I stated, not as an argument, but as a fact. My property line is clearly marked 20 feet on the other side of that fence. I gestured with my chin toward the split-rail fence that separated the manicured lawns of Lakeside Meadows from the wilder growth of my land. This trail is entirely within my property. Your attorney is either incompetent or he's lying to you. Either way, if you set one piece of machinery on this path, you will be committing criminal trespass and destruction of a protected historical site. Her face, already florid, deepened to a shade of magenta. The mask of saccharine community spirit slipped, revealing the raw, power-hungry core beneath. You will not threaten me, she hissed, shaking the papers at me like a talisman. We have the votes, we have the funds, and we have the will of the community. If you interfere on Monday, we will have the sheriff remove you. We will place a lien on your property for the cost of the paving and for every fine you accumulate by obstructing progress. This is happening, Mr. Evans. You can either accept it or you can learn a very expensive lesson in what happens when one man stands against an entire community. She turned then, her back rigid with indignation, and waddled over to the golf cart parked nearby, its HOA president placard gleaming in the afternoon sun. The threat lingered, a poison in the air. An expensive lesson. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I've faced down warlords in dusty, forgotten countries who had more legal standing than she did. This wasn't a community. This was a miniature dictatorship, and its tyrant had just declared war on the wrong colonel. If you think this is insane, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I want to hear your HOA horror stories, because this was only the beginning. As her golf cart zipped away, leaving a puff of righteous dust in its wake, I remained on the trail, the leather of the reins cool and familiar in my hands. Valor blew out a soft breath, as if sensing the shift in my posture from calm readiness to cold resolve. The crisp autumn air now felt like the electric stillness before a storm, where Karen saw a muddy ditch and an obstacle to her vision of suburban perfection. I saw a piece of history, a sanctuary, and more importantly, a line on a map that I would defend with the same methodical precision I'd once used to build bridges under fire. She thought her paper-thin authority and a unanimous vote from a roomful of cowed homeowners gave her power. She was about to find out what real power, backed by law, documentation, and unwavering resolve, actually looked like. The battle for the Bridlewood path had officially begun. I turned Valor back toward my barn, the confrontation replaying in my mind, not with anger, but with a cold, analytical clarity. Anger was a luxury. Strategy was a necessity. I had purchased this land, this beautiful, sprawling, 50-acre slice of rolling hills and dense oak forest, specifically because it was not part of any homeowners association. It was an island of autonomy bordering the meticulously planned and fiercely regulated kingdom of Lakeside Meadows. I was a retired colonel from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. My life had been a masterclass in understanding rules, regulations, boundaries, and the critical importance of having your paperwork in absolute, unassailable order. When I bought the property, I spent 6 months with surveyors, lawyers, and state officials, ensuring every line, every covenant, every easement was understood and properly recorded. The property had once been part of a much larger 200-year-old farmstead, and the Bridlewood Heritage Path was its most significant feature. The state, recognizing its historical value as a segment of the original county-to-county post road, we had partnered with the previous owner to place it under a permanent conservation easement, managed by the property owner in perpetuity. I had inherited that duty, and I took it seriously. The path was not a scar on the landscape, it was its heartline. Inside my house, a rustic but solid structure I designed myself, I bypassed the living room and went straight to my office. It was a commander space, orderly, functional, with everything in its place. On the far wall hung framed survey maps of my property, looking less like decoration and more like strategic battle plans. I walked to the large oak flat file cabinet where I kept the crown jewels of property ownership. I pulled out the heavy folder labeled Deed and Easement, Bridlewood. Spreading the contents across my massive desk was like laying out the components of a complex machine. There was the original deed, the meticulously detailed survey map with GPS coordinates marking every boundary stone, and the thick, multi-page document from the State Historical Preservation Office, SHPO, outlining the terms of the conservation easement. I smoothed out the survey map. The line was stark and unforgiving. There was my property, and there was the Lakeside Meadows subdivision. The Bridlewood path ran a good 30 feet inside my boundary at its closest point to the HOA. There was no ambiguity, no gray area for a fantasy implied easement to take root. Karen's lawyer was either a fool or a crook. My money was on the latter. This wasn't my first dance with Karen Miller. Since she'd been elected HOA president 2 years ago on a platform of restoring community standards, she'd made my property her pet project. First came the anonymous notes in my mailbox about the unpleasant agricultural odors from my 2 horses. Then came the official-looking letters, citing non-existent county ordinances about the distance a barn could be from a residential area. Never mind that my barn was a quarter-mile from the nearest Lakeside Meadows home and fully compliant with every actual code. Each time I had responded politely, professionally, and with overwhelming documentation. I sent her copies of the county agricultural zoning laws. I sent her a letter from the county health department confirming my manure management plan was exemplary. Each response from me was a paper shield, and it seemed only to enrage her further. She couldn't control me, and for a person like Karen, a thing you couldn't control was a thing that must be destroyed. No, paving the trail was her ultimate power play. It wasn't about property values, it was about conquest. It was about erasing a feature that represented everything she couldn't tame, the wildness, the history, the independence, and replacing it with sterile, uniform asphalt, a monument to her authority. I sat down, the leather of my office chair creaking in the quiet room. The first step was to formalize my position. A verbal warning was one thing, a legal document was another. It was time to build the first layer of my defense. I turned on my computer and began to draft a cease and desist letter. This would not be an emotional plea, it would be a surgical instrument. I cited my deed record number, the official parcel identification from the county tax assessor, and the exact statute from the state code that governed protected historical sites. I quoted verbatim the section of the conservation easement that explicitly forbade any surface alteration, including but not limited to paving, grading, or construction, without express written consent from the State Historical Preservation Office. I made it clear that any attempt to perform such work would result in immediate legal action, seeking both injunctive relief and punitive damages. This wasn't a threat, it was a promise. The letter was my first shot across her bow, a precisely aimed round designed to let her know she was engaging a prepared enemy. I would give her one last chance to stand down before I escalated the engagement to a level she couldn't possibly comprehend. And I would let her own arrogance be the tripwire for the trap I was about to set. With the cease and desist letter printed on heavy bond paper and sealed in a crisp business envelope, I decided against the impersonal nature of certified mail. This message needed to be delivered personally. I needed to see her face, to take a direct reading of her resolve. I drove my F350, a machine as practical and unpretentious as I was, over to the pristine, winding streets of Lakeside Meadows. Her house was easy to spot. It was one of the larger models, the executive, but she'd festooned it with so many improvements. A faux Tuscan fountain in the tiny front yard, an American flag that was technically larger than the HOA's own rules allowed, and a gaudy Miller sign hanging by the door, that it looked less like a home and more like a desperate plea for status. I rang the bell. After a moment, the door opened a crack and a man's face peered out. It was Gary, Karen's husband. He was a small, pale man who always looked vaguely apologetic, as if he were perpetually sorry for the space he occupied in the world. "Mr. Evans," he stammered, his eyes darting nervously back into the house. "Karen's, busy." From deep within the house, her voice boomed. "Who is it, Gary? Is it that man?" Gary flinched. Before he could answer, Karen appeared behind him, shoving him aside as she filled the doorway. She was wearing a different tracksuit today, this one a vibrant shade of purple. "What do you want?" she demanded, her hands on her hips. I held out the envelope. "And this is a formal cease and desist letter, Karen. It outlines my legal position regarding the Bridlewood Path. It includes copies of the relevant state statutes and my conservation agreement. I strongly advise you and your lawyer to read it carefully before Monday." She snatched the envelope from my hand, a flicker of something, was it uncertainty, crossing her face before being immediately replaced by her default mask of belligerence. She tore it open right there in the doorway, her eyes scanning the page with theatrical contempt. "More of your little papers," she scoffed, though I saw her pause at the mention of the state statutes. "I told you, our lawyer has handled this. He's the best. He says your path is an implied easement for community use. A judge will agree. Your little threats are meaningless." She crumpled the letter and the supporting documents into a ball in her fist. "The paving will proceed as scheduled. Now get off my property." She slammed the door. I stood there for a moment, not angry, but enlightened. She wasn't just arrogant. She was insulated by a bubble of bad advice and pure ego. She had crumpled a legal warning as if it were a junk mail flyer. This was good. This was exactly what I needed. She was refusing to de-escalate. She was choosing to charge ahead, blindfolded, into a minefield of her own making. The next day, true to form, the escalation came from her. The mail carrier delivered a crisp, official-looking envelope from the Lakeside Meadows HOA. Inside were two separate violation notices. The first was a $500 fine for failure to maintain property in line with community aesthetic standards, with a handwritten note at the bottom, "Unkempt dirt trail." The second was a $100 fine for unauthorized commercial activity on or adjacent to HOA property. I frowned, puzzled by the second one, until I read the description. Allowing non-residents to engage in equestrian activities without a community permit. They had seen me letting Maria, the 10-year-old daughter of my neighbors the Garcias, ride her little pony, Patches, alongside me on the trail a few times. The idea that this constituted commercial activity was ludicrous, but it was a clear signal. Karen wasn't just targeting the trail, she was targeting me, personally, and anyone associated with me. It was time to see who my allies were. I walked over to the Garcia's house, a modest but immaculately kept home at the edge of the development. Carlos and Elena Garcia were a young couple, both teachers, who had been subjected to Karen's tyranny since they moved in. I showed them the fines. Carlos's face tightened. "She's unbelievable," he said, shaking his head. "Last month, she fined us $200 because our garbage cans were visible from the street for 1 hour after the truck had passed. Last year, it was a warning because the beige paint we used on our trim was, and I quote, too warm for the approved palette." Elena added, "We're afraid to even have a barbecue. Someone might complain about the smoke. Everyone is." This was the confirmation I needed. Karen didn't rule by consent. She ruled by fear. But fear has a breaking point. My last stop of the day was to see Bill Peterson, a retired corporate lawyer who lived on the other side of the subdivision. Bill was a sharp, cantankerous man in his late 70s who'd made a hobby of studying the HOA's bylaws just for the intellectual exercise of finding their weaknesses. He'd had his own run-ins with Karen over the height of his prize-winning rose bushes. He read my cease and desist in the violation notices, a grim smile spreading across his face. "Implied easement," he chuckled, shaking his head. "That's a Hail Mary pass in property law, and it almost never works, especially against a recorded conservation easement. Her lawyer's a hack." He looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. "She's going to try it, isn't she? She's going to bring in the pavers." "That's the plan," I confirmed. "Good," Bill said, his eyes gleaming. Let her. Let her walk right into it. An attempted violation of a state conservation agreement is a much bigger hammer than a simple trespassing complaint. While she's busy with that, you and I should start a petition to inspect the HOA's financials. I've had a bad feeling about their books for a while. The final piece of my initial strategy fell into place. My daughter, Sarah, who worked as a paralegal in the city, was due for a visit this weekend. Her specialty was forensic accounting and discovery. The war was no longer just on the trail. It was about to open up on a second front, Karen's checkbook. Sarah arrived on Friday evening, her compact car loaded with a laptop bag and 2 large briefcases that I knew were filled with legal pads and reference books. At 28, she had my methodical nature, but her mother's fiery sense of justice. When I laid out the situation on the dining room table, the HOA letters, my cease and desist, the property maps, her eyes lit up with a familiar, predatory gleam. This wasn't just a family problem for her. It was a professional challenge. An implied easement against a recorded state conservation agreement? "Dad, their lawyer is either disbarred or about to be," she said, already typing furiously on her laptop. "Okay, let's see who we're dealing with." Within an hour, she had unearthed a trove of information. The law firm representing the HOA, Pearson Associates, wasn't some high-powered legal machine. It was a 2-bit operation run out of a strip mall an hour away. And the principal partner, one Franklin Pierce, was Karen Miller's first cousin. "Oh, this is dirty," Sarah murmured, leaning closer to the screen. "This is really dirty. He has a history. A dozen complaints to the state bar for frivolous lawsuits and overbilling, all dismissed for lack of evidence. He preys on people who can't afford to fight back. He and Karen are running a racket." The strategy Bill and I had discussed now crystallized into a concrete plan of action. We wouldn't just defend, we would counterattack. The paving attempt on Monday would be the public trigger, the undeniable act of aggression that would give us the moral and legal high ground. While the state dealt with that, we would use the distraction to launch our internal investigation. Sarah started drafting a formal records request, citing the specific section of the HOA bylaws that gave homeowners the right to inspect all financial documents, contracts, and meeting minutes. Bill, meanwhile, began quietly circulating a petition among the neighbors he knew were trustworthy, gathering the signatures needed to force a full, independent audit of the HOA's books. My role was to prepare the battlefield. First, I called the State Historical Preservation Office. I got through to a senior enforcement officer named Eleanor Albright, a woman whose voice was as starched and no-nonsense as her title. I calmly explained the situation, the existence of the Bridlewood Heritage Path on my property, the conservation easement number, and the HOA's declared intent to pave it on Monday morning. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Let me be clear, Mr. Evans," Ms. Albright said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency. "Here, are you telling me that a homeowners association has voted to destroy a state-protected historical asset?" "That is precisely what I'm telling you," I replied. "Their president informed me in person and has rejected a formal cease and desist letter." I could hear the furious clicking of a keyboard. "This is outrageous. This carries civil penalties starting at $50,000 per incident, not to mention potential felony charges for the individuals authorizing the work. We will be sending an official notice to the HOA president immediately. But Mr. Evans," she added, "if they are foolish enough to actually show up with equipment on Monday, please, get pictures, get video, and call me the second they arrive. We would be very, very interested in catching them in the act." My next call was to the Department of Natural Resources, the agency that co-administered the environmental aspects of the easement. They were equally appalled and promised to coordinate with the SHPO. The state's bureaucratic gears were beginning to turn. They moved slowly, but once they gained momentum, they were unstoppable. Finally, I made 2 more calls. The first was to an old friend from my Army days, a man we called Tank. He was a giant of a man who now ran a successful heavy equipment and towing company. I explained the situation and asked if he could have a heavy-duty wrecker on standby Monday morning, just in case. "You need something moved, Colonel." "You got it," he said, no further questions asked. The second call was to another Army buddy, Scribe, who had traded his uniform for a press pass and was now a well-respected investigative journalist for the largest regional newspaper. "Yeah, Scribe, I might have a story for you," I said. "A classic David versus Goliath, with a little bit of government corruption and historical preservation thrown in." "My favorite kind," he replied. "Keep me posted. Let me know when the fireworks start." By Sunday evening, all the pieces were in place. The legal trap was set. The state agencies were alerted. My allies were ready. I had my binder of documents, the deed, the survey, the easement, the letters from the SHPO, all organized in plastic sleeves, ready for presentation. I felt the familiar pre-mission calm settle over me. Karen thought this was a neighborhood dispute she could win with bullying and a crooked lawyer. She was about to find out it was a multi-front engagement against a coordinated force, and she had willingly, arrogantly, marched her army onto a killing field of my own design. The only thing left to do was wait for the enemy to appear at the designated time and place. Monday morning couldn't come soon enough. The dawn on Monday broke clear and cold, the kind of autumn morning where you can see your breath, and the sky is a hard, brilliant blue. I was up before sunrise, as was my habit, and after feeding the horses, I stood by the kitchen window with a mug of black coffee, watching the entrance to the Bridlewood path. The air was still. The world seemed to be holding its breath. At precisely 7:55 a.m., I heard it, the low guttural rumble of a heavy diesel engine, accompanied by the high-pitched beeping of a vehicle in reverse. A moment later, a massive, bright yellow paving machine, looking like some prehistoric insect, crawled into view, followed by a large dump truck filled with gravel. The name on the side of both vehicles was Clear Cut Landscaping and Paving. As promised, they were here, and right behind them, like a malevolent pilot fish, was Karen's golf cart. She parked it on the grass verge, a triumphant smile plastered across her face. She was wearing a hard hat, a comical addition to her fluorescent yellow tracksuit, as if she were personally overseeing a grand public works project. A small gaggle of about a dozen HOA residents had gathered on the sidewalk to watch the show, a mix of her loyal cronies and the merely curious. It was time. I grabbed my document binder, put on my old Army field jacket, and walked out the door. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I walked with deliberate purpose to my F350, which I had already positioned earlier that morning. I started the engine and drove it slowly, carefully, onto the very edge of my property, parking it squarely across the entrance to the trail. I turned off the engine, leaving the big truck as a silent, immovable steel barrier. I got out, binder in hand, and stood in front of my vehicle waiting. The foreman of the paving crew, A burly man with a weathered face and a weary expression hopped down from the cab of the paver. He strode toward me, wiping his hands on a rag. "Morning," he grunted. "Gotta ask you to move your truck. We've got a job to do here." From her golf cart, Karen's voice shrieked across the distance. "Don't talk to him. Just call the sheriff and have him towed. He's trespassing." The foreman ignored her, his eyes on me. He'd clearly dealt with this kind of drama before. "Look, mister," he said, "do I just do what the work order says? The HOA is paying us to pave a walkway here. It's nothing personal." "I understand you have a job to do," I said calmly, my voice steady. "But your client, the HOA, has ordered you to perform that job on my private property in direct violation of state law. This is not a community path. This is a state-protected historical trail under my management." I opened the binder to the survey map, showing him the clear property line. "You see this? Everything from this fence inward is my land. The path is 30 feet inside that line." I then flipped to the letter from the State Historical Preservation Office. "And this is a letter from the SHPO confirming the trail's protected status. If you or your equipment cross this property line, your company will be committing criminal trespass and felony destruction of a historical asset. Under State Statute 18C, that carries personal and corporate liability for triple the cost of restoration, plus potential jail time for the operator and the person who authorized the work." I pointed toward Karen. "Her." I handed him a business card I had pre-printed with the names and direct phone numbers for Miss Albright at the SHPO and an assistant attorney general I had been advised to contact. "I strongly suggest you call one of these numbers before you proceed. This is your one and only warning." The foreman's weary expression hardened with concern. He looked at the official letterhead, at the statutes I had highlighted, at my calm, unblinking eyes, and then over at Karen, who was now out of her golf cart and practically vibrating with rage. "He's lying! He made all that up!" she screamed. "I have a contract. You have to do the job or I'll sue your company." The foreman held up a hand to silence her, a motion that only made her angrier. He pulled out his phone, looked at the card I'd given him, and dialed. He turned his back for a semblance of privacy, but I could hear his side of the conversation. "Yeah, hi, my name is Dave. I'm with Clear Cut Paving. I'm at a job site in Lakeside Meadows." "Yeah, that's the one. The homeowner here is saying it's a state heritage trail?" "Uh-huh. I see, a felony, you say. And the fines are how much?" "Right. Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am, I understand completely." He hung up the phone, his face pale under his tan. He walked back over to me, and avoiding Karen's furious gaze, he handed my card back. "Sorry for the trouble, sir," he said quietly. "We're packing it up." He turned to his crew. "All right, let's go. Job's canceled." Karen let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a shriek. "What are you doing? You can't leave. I have a contract." The foreman finally turned to face her. "Lady, I'm not losing my business and going to jail because you and your cousin, the lawyer, don't know how to read a map. The woman from the state just told me if my tire so much as touches that trail, she'll have my entire company seized. We're done here." As the crew began securing the equipment, Karen, in a paroxysm of fury, did exactly what I had predicted she would. She whipped out her phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I need the sheriff immediately," she yelled into the phone. "Or there's a man trespassing on HOA property, blocking public access, and threatening workers with his vehicle. He's unstable and dangerous. You need to get here right now." The trap was now fully sprung. She wasn't just attempting to destroy the path anymore. She had now filed a false police report, escalating her own downfall to a whole new level. The wail of a siren grew steadily closer, cutting through the morning air. 2 county sheriff's department cruisers pulled up, lights flashing. 2 deputies, a senior, grizzled officer named Miller, and a younger, sharper-looking deputy named Chen, got out of their cars. Their posture was all business. They were responding to a call about a public disturbance and a potential threat, and they took it seriously. Karen, seeing the uniforms, immediately transformed into the role of a frantic, concerned citizen. She rushed toward them, her voice filled with manufactured panic. "Oh, thank God you're here, officers. This man," she pointed a trembling finger at me, "has parked his truck illegally to block a community project. He threatened the work crew, and he's been nothing but a menace to this neighborhood for years. He's on our property, and he refuses to leave." Deputy Miller held up a hand, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, please, let's just slow down. Let us figure out what's going on." He turned to me. "Sir, is this your vehicle?" "Yes, it is, Deputy," I said, my voice calm and respectful. "And it is parked on my private property." "That is a lie," Karen shrieked. "This is all HOA common area. The path is for everyone." Deputy Chen, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Ma'am, Judge, we're going to need you to let us handle this." "Sir," he addressed me, "can you provide any documentation to support your claim of ownership?" This was the moment, the checkmate move I had prepared for. "Absolutely, Deputy," I said. I handed him the binder. "In here, you will find the recorded deed for my property, parcel number 75B12. You'll also find a certified survey map from 2012, which clearly shows the property line and the location of the Bridlewood Path well within my land. Tab C is the conservation easement agreement with the state, and Tab D is a letter I received on Friday from Ms. Eleanor Albright of the State Historical Preservation Office, confirming the path's protected status and warning against any alteration." Deputy Chen took the binder, his eyebrows raising slightly at its thickness and organization. He and Deputy Miller reviewed the first few pages, their heads close together. I saw Chen point to the survey line, then to the physical fence, then to where we were all standing. He nodded slowly. "I'm going to run this parcel number," Deputy Miller said, walking back to his patrol car. Karen watched him go, a smug look returning to her face, as if she was certain the official record would somehow align with her delusions. The neighbors who had gathered were silent, watching the drama unfold. The paving crew had paused their departure, leaning against their trucks to see how it would end. While Miller was in his car, Deputy Chen addressed me. "So, your position is that the HOA hired this crew to pave a path that is on your land and is legally protected by the state?" "That is correct, Deputy," I confirmed. "I warned the HOA president, Ms. Miller, verbally and with a written cease and desist, which she ignored. The foreman of the paving company just confirmed the legal status with the SHPO himself, which is why they are leaving." A few minutes later, Deputy Miller got out of his car, his face set like granite. He walked not to me, but directly to Karen. He did not look happy. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low and serious, "I've just confirmed with the county clerk and the tax assessor. This gentleman is correct. His property line is exactly where he says it is. This path and the land for 20 feet on either side of it is his. It is not, and has never been, HOA property." Karen's jaw dropped. The color drained from her face, leaving her with a pasty, slack-jawed expression. But our lawyer," she stammered. "Your lawyer was wrong, ma'am," Deputy Miller said, his voice hardening. "Furthermore, I spoke with my dispatcher, who conferred with the state police. This Bridlewood Path is indeed a designated heritage trail. Instructing this crew to pave it wasn't just a matter of trespassing. It was an attempt to solicit a felony. By filing a false report claiming this man was trespassing on your property, you have committed an additional offense." The word felony hung in the air like a guillotine. The assembled neighbors started murmuring amongst themselves. The foreman of the paving crew just shook his head, a look of, "I told you so," on his face. "So to be clear," Deputy Miller continued, his voice rising so everyone could hear, "you called us out here under false pretenses to try and force a man off his own land so you could illegally destroy a historic site. Is that about the size of it?" Karen was speechless. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. The edifice of her authority had not just cracked, it had been publicly and catastrophically demolished. The deputies gave me back my binder. "You're all clear, Mr. Evans. Sorry for the disturbance," Deputy Miller said, tipping his hat. He gave Karen one last, long, disappointed look. "Ma'am, I suggest you go home, and I'd advise the HOA board to think very, very carefully about its next steps." With that, the deputies got in their cars and left. The paving crew, not wasting another second, fired up their engines and rumbled away. Karen was left standing alone in the middle of the road, her ridiculous hard hat askew, the object of pity and scorn from the very neighbors she had sought to rule. The battle was won. But the war for justice was just getting started. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was a profound, echoing silence. Karen, stripped of her audience and her authority in one fell swoop, scrambled into her golf cart and sped away without a single backward glance. The small crowd of neighbors dispersed, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others whispering excitedly. I saw Carlos and Elena Garcia give me a subtle thumbs up before heading back to their house. The public humiliation was a significant victory, but I knew it was only tactical. The strategic objective was to dismantle the corrupt system Karen had built. This was the moment to press the advantage. That afternoon, the four of us, myself, my daughter Sarah, Bill the retired lawyer, and Carlos Garcia, representing the younger families, met in my office. The air was electric with purpose. "She's wounded, but she's not out," Bill said, tapping a pen on his legal pad. "She'll double down. She'll use HOA funds to hire that crooked cousin of hers to sue you for defamation or some other nonsense. We can't give her time to regroup." Sarah nodded in agreement, her laptop already open. Bill's right. The key is the financials. Her power comes from her control of the HOA's money. We need to take that away from her. The petition for the audit is our primary weapon. Bill smiled. "Already have it. We got 25 signatures this morning after the showdown. That's more than double the 10% required by the bylaws." Our plan was a three-pronged assault. Prong one was legal and administrative. Sarah and Bill would formally submit the petition, demanding an emergency board meeting to authorize a full, independent audit of the last 3 years of the HOA's finances. They would also draft a letter to the HOA's insurance carrier, notifying them of the board's reckless actions and potential liability in the Heritage Trail incident. Nothing gets a board's attention faster than the threat of losing their directors' and officers' insurance. Prong two was public pressure. It was time to call in my friend or scribe. I gave him a full briefing, providing him with copies of all my documentation, the names of the state officials, and a list of other residents, like the Garcias, who were willing to speak on the record about their experiences with Karen's harassment. A well-placed news story would turn a local dispute into a regional scandal, putting the entire HOA board under a microscope they could not escape. Prong three was the state-level hammer. I compiled a detailed report of the day's events, complete with time-stamped photos I had taken from my window, and emailed it to Ms. Albright at the SHPO and her counterpart at the DNR. I detailed Karen Miller's specific actions, including the filing of the false police report. The wheels of state bureaucracy were now fully in motion. The first domino fell 2 days later. Scribe's article was published on the front page of the Sunday regional paper. The headline was devastating. HOA president attempts to illegally pave state heritage trail, uses sheriffs to intimidate landowner. The story was a masterclass in factual, damning journalism. It quoted Ms. Albright from the SHPO, who called the HOA's actions a shocking and arrogant disregard for state law and our shared history. It quoted Deputy Miller, who confirmed the property lines and the nature of Karen's 911 call. And it included an interview with Carlos Garcia, who spoke eloquently about a culture of fear and intimidation within the Lakeside Meadows community. The article was a bombshell. Phones started ringing all over the neighborhood. People who had been too afraid to speak up were suddenly furious that their HOA fees were nearly used to fund a felony. The board members, who had rubber-stamped Karen's proposal without doing any due diligence, were now facing the wrath of their neighbors and the threat of personal legal jeopardy. The day the article came out, Sarah and Bill hand-delivered the audit petition to the HOA's official management company. Simultaneously, the HOA board members received a terrifyingly formal letter from the State Attorney General's office, informing them that they were under investigation for conspiracy to destroy a protected historical site. Panic ensued. Karen tried to rally her troops, calling an emergency informational meeting. But this time, the room wasn't filled with compliant subjects. It was an angry mob. People were holding up copies of the newspaper, demanding answers. Karen tried to dismiss the article as fake news and a personal vendetta by me. She claimed I had tricked the deputies and the reporter, but her credibility was shot. When she was asked about her lawyer cousin and the implied easement theory, she faltered, unable to explain why she had led the community to the brink of a legal and financial catastrophe. when the meeting devolved into a shouting match with residents demanding her immediate resignation. She refused, her face a mask of defiant rage, and stormed out of her own meeting. The tide had turned. Her power was based on a carefully constructed illusion of authority, and that illusion had been shattered in the public square. Now we just had to wait for the auditors to go in and find the bodies she had undoubtedly buried in the budget. The HOA board, facing immense pressure from the community and the looming threat of state prosecution, had no choice but to cave. They voted, without Karen, who was pointedly excluded from the executive session, to authorize the independent audit we had demanded. They hired a reputable forensic accounting firm from the city, one with no ties to anyone in the community, each to conduct a thorough review of the past 3 years of financial records. It was a stay of execution for the board members, a way to show they were now taking the matter seriously. But for Karen, it was the beginning of the end. While the auditors began their meticulous work, the second front of our counteroffensive heated up. The law firm of Pierce & Associates, run by Karen's cousin Franklin, attempted a bizarre legal maneuver. They filed a lawsuit against me on behalf of the HOA, seeking damages for tortious interference with a contract, the paving contract, and a court order to declare the Bridlewood Path a public easement. It was a desperate, foolish move, a legal tantrum. My daughter Sarah and our ally Bill the lawyer could barely contain their glee. "This is a gift," Bill said, spreading the court papers on my desk. "Mush, he's just handed us jurisdiction. We can file a counterclaim and bring everything, the financial mismanagement, the harassment, the conspiracy with his cousin, into a court of law. He's paying to put his own client on trial." We filed our response immediately. We not only requested a dismissal of their frivolous lawsuit, but also filed a robust counterclaim. We sued the HOA for harassment and abusive process, citing the litany of bogus fines. We also named Karen Miller personally in the suit, as well as her cousin's law firm, alleging civil conspiracy and seeking punitive damages. Crucially, we filed for discovery, demanding every email, text message, and document exchange between Karen, the board, and Pierce & Associates related to the Bridlewood Path and any other legal actions taken over the past 3 years. This legal maneuver effectively froze the HOA's ability to take any further action against me or anyone else. Their own lawsuit was now a vehicle for their own destruction. Franklin Pierce, realizing he had stepped on a legal landmine, immediately filed a motion to have our counterclaim dismissed. A preliminary hearing was set. The week before the hearing, the first report from the auditors landed like a grenade. It was only a preliminary finding, but it was damning. The auditors had found significant irregularities in the landscaping and maintenance contracts, specifically a company called Greenscape Solutions, which had received over $80,000 in HOA payments over the last 2 years for community beautification projects, appeared not to exist. It had no business license, no physical address, and no employees. The checks issued to Greenscape Solutions had all been deposited into a bank account that the auditors had traced back to a shell corporation, and the sole signatory on that corporation's account was one Gary Miller, Karen's meek, apologetic husband. It was a classic embezzlement scheme, simple and brazen. Karen was inventing fake companies, awarding them HOA contracts, and then funneling the money directly into her own pockets. The community beautification was nothing more than the beautification of her bank account. Sarah, working through the night, cross-referenced the dates of the payments to Greenscape Solutions with the HOA's general ledger. She found that many of the payments coincided with major special assessments levied on the homeowners for things like tree trimming and pond dredging that never seemed to quite get finished. Karen wasn't just skimming off the top. She was actively creating fake crises to justify raising more money to steal. The judge for our preliminary hearing was a no-nonsense woman named Judge Marion Price. Karen's cousin Franklin stood up and argued that our counterclaim was a vindictive and baseless attempt to harass his client. He portrayed Karen as a dedicated public servant and me as a disgruntled troublemaker. When it was our turn, Bill Peterson stood up. He didn't argue legal theory. He simply said, "Your Honor, before you rule on this motion, if we believe this document might be relevant." He handed the clerk a copy of the auditor's preliminary report. Judge Price read the single page, her expression growing colder with every line. She looked up from the paper, peering over her glasses first at Franklin Pierce, then at Karen, who was sitting in the gallery looking supremely confident. "Mr. Pierce," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet, "is it your testimony that a counterclaim alleging financial impropriety is baseless when a preliminary audit has found that your client's husband is the signatory on an account for a shell company that has received $80,000 from the HOA?" Franklin Pierce turned the color of old parchment. He stammered, Your Honor, that report is preliminary. It's unsubstantiated." Judge Price slammed her gavel down, making everyone in the courtroom jump. "Motion to dismiss is denied," she boomed. "And counsel, I would advise you to read up on the penalties for presenting misleading information to this court. Discovery will proceed as requested, immediately." The game was over and they knew it. We now had the legal authority to subpoena bank records, phone records, and anything else we needed. The audit wasn't just an internal matter anymore. Its findings were now part of a public court case. Karen and her cousin had tried to use the law as a sword, only to find they had fallen on it themselves. The dam of Karen's corrupt enterprise broke, and the flood of revelations was swift and devastating. Armed with the judge's order, Sarah and Bill unleashed a torrent of subpoenas. They requested bank records for Karen and Gary Miller, one for Franklin Pierce's law firm, and for the Greenscape Solutions Shell Corporation. They subpoenaed phone records, emails from the HOA's server, and the personal computers of the entire board. What we uncovered was worse than we had imagined. The Greenscape Solutions scheme was just the tip of the iceberg. The auditors, digging deeper, found two other fake companies. One, Patriot Security, had been paid $30,000 for nightly patrols that never happened. Another, Premier Pool Services, had billed the HOA for phantom chemical treatments and repairs, siphoning off another $45,000. In total, Karen and her husband had embezzled nearly $160,000 from their neighbors over 3 years. But the truly sinister part was the role of her cousin, Franklin Pierce. The discovery process revealed his law firm's billing records. He had a system. And when a resident questioned a fine or a rule, Karen would refer them to Franklin. Franklin would then engage in protracted legal correspondence, running up thousands of dollars in legal fees, which were, of course, billed to the HOA. If the resident gave in, Karen won. If the resident fought back, the HOA, and by extension, the residents themselves, paid Franklin's exorbitant fees. But it was even dirtier than that. Emails between Karen and Franklin revealed a kickback scheme. For every dollar Franklin billed the HOA, he kicked back 20 cents to Karen, disguised as consulting fees paid to yet another shell company. They had weaponized the legal system against the very people they were supposed to be serving, creating a self-sustaining cycle of intimidation and profit. The paving contract for the Bridlewood Path was to be their masterpiece. The bid from Clear Cut Paving was for $25,000, but the contract Karen had the board approve was for $40,000. The extra $15,000 was to be split between her and Franklin as a project management fee. They were going to pave over my state-protected trail and get their neighbors to pay them a handsome bonus for the privilege of committing a felony. Bill Peterson, the retired lawyer, took this evidence and called a meeting with the other 4 board members, the ones who weren't Karen. He laid it all out on the table in the community clubhouse. The fake companies, the embezzlement, the kickback scheme with the lawyer. He showed them the bank statements, the emails, the auditor's report. The board members looked like they had seen a ghost. They were guilty of negligence, of rubber stamping Karen's proposals without question, but they weren't criminals. They were terrified. "You have 2 choices," Bill told them, his voice calm but firm. "You can continue to protect Karen, in which case you will be named as co-conspirators in our civil suit and will likely face criminal charges for aiding and abetting fraud. Or you can do the right thing. You can call an emergency meeting of the homeowners, present this evidence, and vote to remove her. You can cooperate fully with the district attorney's office, which we will be contacting tomorrow." It was no choice at all. They immediately agreed. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday. The notice sent to every homeowner was simple and stark: an emergency meeting to discuss the findings of the independent financial audit and to hold a vote of no confidence in President Karen Miller. The stage was set for the final, public execution of her reign. The community clubhouse, which could comfortably seat 100 people, was overflowing. There were nearly 200 residents packed inside, standing along the walls and spilling out into the foyer. The anger in the room was a palpable, physical force. This wasn't just about a paved path or unfair fines anymore. This was about betrayal. These people had been systematically robbed by one of their own. I was given the floor first. I stood at the podium, not as a victor, but as a member of the wider community that had been wronged. I didn't need to be bombastic. When the facts were my weapon, using a projector Sarah had set up, I walked the audience through the entire saga, from the initial confrontation on the trail to the final damning page of the audit report. I put the slide up showing the money trail, the HOA's account, the checks written to Greenscape Solutions, and the deposits into the account controlled by Gary Miller. I showed them the inflated paving contract. I showed them the emails detailing the kickback scheme with Franklin Pierce. It was all there, in black and white, an undeniable story of greed and corruption. Karen, who had insisted on attending, sat in the front row with her arms crossed, her face a thunderous mask. She tried to interrupt, shouting, "Lies! It's all lies! This is a witch hunt!" But this time, no one was listening. The crowd shouted her down. "Sit down! Hunt Karen! Thief! Let him speak!" She was drowned out by the voices of the people she had once ruled with an iron fist. Next, Bill Peterson took the podium. He explained the legal implications in clear, simple terms. "This is not just a violation of the bylaw," he said, his voice resonating with moral authority. "This is embezzlement. This is wire fraud. These are serious crimes. The district attorney's office is already preparing its case." He then turned to the board members sitting at the head table. "The bylaws are clear. A board member can be removed immediately for cause by a majority vote of the homeowners present at a meeting. The cause tonight is gross misconduct and dereliction of duty." He looked out at the sea of angry faces. "I call for a vote of no confidence in Karen Miller, and for her immediate removal from the board of directors." The interim board president, a shaken man named Tom, asked for the vote. A forest of hands shot up. It was unanimous. "The motion carries," Tom said, his voice barely a whisper. "Karen Miller is hereby removed from the Lakeside Meadows HOA Board of Directors, effective immediately." A cheer went up in the room, a cathartic release of years of frustration and fear. Karen stood up, her face contorted in a snarl of pure hatred. She pointed a finger at me. You did this," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You will regret this." She turned and stormed toward the exit, pushing people out of her way. But as she burst through the doors into the parking lot, she was met with a sight that stopped her cold. Two quiet, professional-looking individuals, a man and a woman in plain clothes, were standing by her car. They held up their badges. "Karen Miller?" the woman asked calmly. "We're with the county's Economic Crimes Unit. You're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud. Please put your hands behind your back." The entire room went silent as they watched through the large clubhouse windows as Karen Miller, the deposed queen of Lakeside Meadows, was handcuffed and placed in the back of an unmarked police car. Justice had not just been served, it had been delivered publicly and decisively. The months that followed were a period of cleansing and rebuilding for the Lakeside Meadows community. The legal system, though sometimes slow, was thorough. Karen and Gary Miller, facing an insurmountable mountain of evidence, pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts of embezzlement and wire fraud. Karen was sentenced to 3 to 5 years in state prison, a sentence that reflected the scale and audacity of her betrayal of public trust. Gary, for his cooperation and lesser role, received 5 years of probation and was ordered to pay back every cent he and his wife had stolen. He sold their gaudy house to begin making the restitution payments to the HOA. Franklin Pierce, Karen's cousin, faced his own reckoning. The state bar, armed with the evidence from our civil suit and the criminal case, permanently disbarred him for ethics violations, including fraud and conspiracy. His sham law firm dissolved, and he faced his own civil suits from other clients he had swindled over the years. Our counterclaim against the HOA was settled. The new board, led by Bill Peterson as the interim president, agreed to all our terms. And they issued a formal public apology to my family and to every other resident who had been unjustly fined or harassed by Karen. They expunged all the bogus violations from the records and refunded any fines that had been paid. They also paid our legal fees, which Sarah and Bill immediately donated back to the HOA's now empty reserve fund to help start the rebuilding process. The culture of Lakeside Meadows began to change almost overnight. The new board, which included Elena Garcia, was transparent and communicative. They held open meetings, published the budget online for all to see, and made decisions based on consensus, not fear. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a tentative but growing sense of genuine community. The ridiculous rules were revisited. The approved color palette for house trim was abolished. And the rule about garbage cans was relaxed. People started talking to their neighbors again without fear of being reported for some minor infraction. To mark the turning point, we decided to host a Bridalwood Heritage Day. The idea came from Elena Garcia, who suggested it as a way to formally heal the rift and celebrate the very thing that had triggered the conflict. The new HOA board co-sponsored the event with me. On a beautiful Saturday in late spring, we opened up my property. I led guided tours on horseback down the Bridalwood path, explaining its history to families who had only ever seen it as a forbidden, muddy ditch. Sarah created informational signs that we posted along the trail, detailing its role as a post road and its ecological importance. Bill Peterson set up a table and explained the HOA's new, transparent financial controls to any resident who was interested. We had a huge barbecue near my barn. The Garcias brought their pony, Patches, and gave rides to the smaller children. Tank, my old army buddy, showed up and let kids climb into the cab of one of his massive tow trucks that he'd parked in my pasture. It was a festival of reconciliation. The trail, once a symbol of division and a flashpoint for a power struggle, had become a bridge between my property and the community. It was now a cherished asset, a piece of shared history that they had fought alongside me to protect. That evening, as the last of the families packed up and headed home, Bill and Sarah and I stood on my porch, watching the sun dip below the hills. "You know," Bill said, a satisfied look on his face, "for a while there, I forgot what it felt like to actually like my neighbors." Sarah laughed. "All it took was taking down a criminal syndicate." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. It was more than just winning. It was about restoring order. It was about proving that a system, whether it's a homeowners association or something much larger, is only as strong as the integrity of the people who run it. It was about defending a line on a map, yes, but it was also about defending a principle. That rules are meant to create order, not to serve as weapons for tyrants. Later, just as twilight settled over the valley, I saddled up Valor for one last ride. We ambled down the Bridalwood path, the soft earth quiet under his hooves. The air was sweet with the smell of honeysuckle and damp earth. I looked over at the houses of Lakeside Meadows, out of their lights twinkling on one by one. There was no more animosity, no more feeling of being under siege. They were just my neighbors. The path ahead of me was rugged, natural, and unchanged, winding its way through the trees just as it had for centuries. It was a testament to the idea that some things are worth protecting, that their value isn't measured in dollars or property values, but in their history, their character, and the freedom they represent. Karen had wanted to pave it, to flatten it, to make it sterile and controllable. But in the end, the path had endured. It had broken her, not the other way around. And in doing so, it had brought a community back to life. Justice, I thought, as Valor and I turned for home, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoration. It's about taking something that was broken and making it whole again. And as I rode back to the barn, the quiet satisfaction of that truth was the greatest victory of all.